According to the Federal Communications Commission, about 6% of the American population still does not have access to high-speed internet. This affects not only our economy, but also minorities and low-income families who are suffering from an education deficit. And joining me now are Antjuan Seawright and Colin Rhinesmith. Antjuan is a CBS News political contributor, Democratic strategist, and founder of Blueprint Strategy. And Colin is an associate professor and director of the Community Informatics Lab at Simmons University. Welcome to both of you. Antjuan, I want to start off with you. How does the U.S. compare to other countries when it comes to providing its citizens with high-speed internet access?
Well, we're far behind, and that's why you said it in your opening. 6% of the population, 19 million people, do not have access to the internet on any given day. We all know the impact that becomes deeper and wider for communities of color. Without internet access, literally children cannot do their homework. The world cannot function. I wrote in my opinion piece for The Hill that broadband access is like oxygen to the American body. This pandemic has exposed the fact that we cannot function or flow as a country without having digital infrastructure, broadband access, and we cannot just make it accessible. It also has to be affordable for everyone, not just certain segments of the population or not just certain segments of the country.
Colin, I want to bring you into this conversation because, as Antjuan articulated, that the pandemic has really demonstrated the need for access becoming more profound, particularly the problem of this homework gap that we are seeing. Explain for our viewers what that is and how it affects all of us.
Absolutely. So the homework gap is really about the gap in access between children and their families that have access to the internet at home and those who don't. And millions of children across the United States do not have access. And as we've seen with the pandemic, it's made it extremely clear. It's made it very visible. And fortunately, schools have really played a significant role in helping to raise awareness in this serious issue facing the United States. And so what we've seen actually is a number of low-income families that are disproportionately poor communities of color, having to go to schools and libraries, park outside to gain internet access. And so this really begins to paint a picture of the severity of the issue.
Antjuan, you've really gone deep into this issue. I'm going to let you go ahead and get a little deep on our air. Explain to us the High Performance Computing and Communication Act of 1991, as well as former Vice President Al Gore's role in drafting it. But especially after you give us that little history lesson, tell us how can lawmakers amend the legislation from the 1990s to make it more relevant?
Well, in the 1960s, a group of scientists who are much smarter than me decided to get together to have a digital infrastructure conversation. And they did. They made it possible so that computers could literally speak to each other. This was funded by the Department of Defense so that Americans can speak to our allies by way of computers. Fast forward the tape to the early 90s, Al Gore, who was ahead of his time and framed the phrase, the information superhighway, wanted to expand what that looks like and fund that even more. Fast forward the tape now, we're having this conversation about still expanding digital infrastructure and making sure that everyone has access to it. You think about healthcare, you think about just living your everyday life, whether it's education, just doing the things that we have to do. Our everyday quality of life is impacted by whether or not we have access to the internet. Whether you're a small business, whether you're a student, whether you're a parent, literally people are ordering food as we are on this program tonight, Lana, by way of the internet. And we know that students who do their homework by way of their phone are less likely to perform higher than those who have broadband access. There's not an 8th grader in this country who can perform their homework without access to the internet. And so it's critical. Al Gore was ahead of his time. Lawmakers are having conversation around infrastructure now. And broadband is infrastructure, as the president said today, as he tweeted yesterday shortly after my opinion piece. And we have to make certain that America is able to continuously compete in an ever-changing global society. That means having broadband access.
So, Colin, what about that? What about Antjuan's point? Can President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan solve this problem? What more needs to be done?
I think so. I think, $100 billion investment in broadband infrastructure will be a fantastic investment in building out both the infrastructure that people need to gain access to the internet, but also to gain access to affordable internet. And so I think the thing that really makes this different this time is a recognition that it's both about availability and affordability. And so I think what we're seeing is the beginning of a plan that recognizes, again, that broadband certainly is infrastructure in the same ways that we've seen electric and other types of utilities that are extremely important. Now, of course, broadband has not been classified or as an infrastructure, as a utility, that is. But I think what we see is a recognition that everybody needs access to the internet in order to, to be successful in life, to do the things that they need to do. But really with this, I think, historic investment with the plan in place, that it really will go quite a long ways to addressing, again, the availability and the affordability gaps in this country.
Lana, if I could say one thing.
All right, Antjuan, you have the last word.
Broadband access should not be a partisan issue. You can make it a political issue, but it should not be a partisan issue. And when people put dollars on broadband access, they have to realize it's an investment, not an expense, because it's going to pay long-term dividends for this country.
An important investment at that. Antjuan Seawright, Colin Rhinesmith, thank you both.